Hey there everyone, do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and today I'm going to be going into Chapter 6 of Part 1 of Liber ABA Magick Book 4 by Crowley. So today's topic is Dhyana. So from Sanskrit, Dhyana has two root words, D, meaning receptacle or mind, and Yana, meaning going or moving. So Dhyana then is moving the mind. Crowley informs the reader that Dhyana means the same thing as the Pali word jhana, and that the Buddha counted 8 jhanas, or varying degrees of trance, Dhyana being one of those. Now there is a debate and confusion over the connection of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, one leading to the next. In 8 lectures on yoga, Crowley writes that, quote, Dhyana is like samadhi, as in asana the jumping of the body, like a frog, is to levitation, end quote. In this video, if I am at all vague, it is due to the problems that occur when trying to write about something so experiential. That, and also that most authors on the subject tend to disagree about the semantics, which have muddled the description of Dhyana, while too many practitioners neglect the concept altogether. Samadhi is a more concrete concept, and has been expounded upon much more. Due to its nature, it tends to be an all-around easier subject to speak on, but we'll get to that one in the next chapter. So, dharana is concentration upon an object in the mind, leading ultimately to a state of being that is likened to loss of self. Samadhi is union of subject and object, and dhyana is a preliminary to that. Dhyana is not a practice, but results from the preliminary yogic practices of asana, dharana, pranayama, etc. It is an altered state of consciousness in and of itself. When a yogi practices these forms of meditation I've previously made videos about, they culminate in the state of dhyana in which the individual has burnt up that which blocks them from the state. It is a form of concentration and detachment, an almost automatic pilot of the mind and body in which nothing can perturb the yogi. The beginning of union with divinity. For example, if the individual has a predisposition to, say, depression, and even a formal diagnosis, dhyana would not cure their ailment of mind. They would still have the chemical predisposition, but it should no longer cripple them while they're in this state. They will be in a state of fully embracing who and what they are without struggling against such things. They will accept the chemical construction of their mind, live with it, and do their will, whatever that may be for said individual. Take the following, for example. There is a book series by Cassandra Clare titled The Mortal Instruments. The characters in this fiction story are, quote, Nephilim, ancestors of the Elohim, end quote. They're part human, part angel. They deal with many intense ordeals, combating mystic beings, and dealing with extremely stressful situations. Yet they have undergone a training in a supernatural school, and with the aid of their preternatural natures, they go from one conflict to the next without ever feeling the crippling weight on their shoulders, not at all disturbed internally by external events, enacting one solution after the next, never batting an eyelash at the stress that would halt the average person. These characters are in a state I would consider dhyana, doing exactly what they feel they need to do, accepting the stress of their situations, but not being perturbed by that stress in the least. It is the first stage of living in conformity with the Tao, doing one's will. Living in the state of dhyana is living with the 90-degree current. It is very much like being on a rowboat, going with the flow of water, never struggling against it as you go downriver peaceably. What exactly did I mean a moment ago when I said that, quote, samadhi is union of subject and object, and dhyana is a preliminary state to that, end quote. This question is twofold, so I'll take the first half and attempt to define subject and object in this context. Subject is the individual, but at their core of who they are, not the superficial self, or lower self, or physical mental self. Perhaps their spiritual self, but this is a somewhat misleading statement. Best to say, it's the single point of consciousness existing and observing experientially the infinite universe around it. The object, then, is the universe, but again, not just the physical universe, but the spiritual underlying nature of the universe, what some call God, others the light. The second half of the question is that dhyana is a preliminary to that union of subject and object as I've defined. Dhyana is an experience, and it is difficult to describe such things, but I'll do my best. It is like describing the smell of a flower, easy to experience, less easy to put that experience into words so that others know what you mean, especially if you're speaking to a crowd and are unsure of whether they have smelled that scent before. While in the state of Dhyana, Crowley writes that, quote, "The conditions of thought, time, and space are abolished. The result on the mind of the student is tremendous. All his thoughts are pushed to their greatest development. He sincerely believes that they have the divine sanction. Perhaps he even supposes that they emanate from this God. He goes back into the world, armed with his intense conviction and authority. He proclaims his ideas with the restraint which is imposed upon most persons by doubt, modesty, and diffidence, while further there is, one may suppose, a real clarification. The most important factor in Dhyana is, however, the annihilation of the ego. Now the man who has experienced any of the more intense forms of Dhyana is thus liberated. The universe is thus destroyed for him, and he for it. His will can therefore go on its way unhampered." End quote. Dhyana then is much like having solar consciousness, knowing your will and doing it. The ego is under dominion of the spirit, and will not crop up causing any doubts or troubles of an emotional nature. The person has seen the true nature of the universe and is enlightened. They are finally on the path and taking their first steps. There is a definite mental clarity and conviction to this person. They are completely sure-footed. They are unaffected by societal pressures that may have otherwise made them question their actions instead of simply doing. Moving forward, a good portion of this chapter swerves around the concept of Dhyana altogether. Much of it describes a person after they have reached it, and the way they are brimming with confidence and conviction, especially prophets who lived to preach of what it was like to experience gods, goddesses, the light, dharma, etc. For then I am tempted to recount my first taste of this experience, that which led me to my search for truth, capital T, and then another of experience of Dhyana years later after studying and practicing the Lima, Hermeticism, and other forms of occult more disciplined. So in 2012, I had begun going to raves. At the time I was rather uneducated and had no interest in anything intellectual. Mostly I was into partying, using hallucinogens heavily at this point, and I still hold that they changed my life for the better. One night, with a friend who was completely sober, we saw out the window of our apartment that the full moon looked red. We went up on the roof, and the following happened. The moon began bouncing in the sky, and then looked elongated. It slowed down its rhythmic bobbing and split in two, and then went back to one. We were recounting to each other what we saw and corroborated that, despite him being sober, we somehow were having the same hallucination. Then as we watched, the moon became a face, the head of a gigantic woman, and the silhouette of her body was lounging across the night sky. She was beautiful. I had no prior conception of a night sky goddess. In fact, raised Roman Catholic, I had no concept of a goddess as an actual thing, other than the ancient Greeks' religion, which I had taken as pure fiction in my mind. I go into more detail of this experience in my video on drugs, which you can find in my playlist. Well, what I now believe that experience to be was just a glimpse of Dhyana, brought about by hallucinogenics and meditation, which I had taken up a few months prior quite heavily. I know firsthand that drugs do bring about various altered states of consciousness, some very high states indeed. But I don't think they are anywhere near the superiority of yogic disciplines, nor a substitute. After the highs, or the experience, whatever you prefer, you do not retain the positive benefits as you would if you reached Dhyana by years of pranayama and dharana exercise. But on that night, that state of being set me about deciding that I would change my life for the better, clean up my act and go in search of truth, again capital T truth, and first seek out that goddess, and then go wherever this new path pointed me. I began asking any and all spiritually leaning people questions, recounting my own spiritual experiences with them, and studying any and all religions I could. On that night, while seeing her, I could do my best to share what it was like. I was in a bodily state of comfort, enamored by the beauty of the sky and the goddess. I was happy and full of endorphins. The only things going through my mind were of esoteric value, especially the symbol of the yin-yang for some reason, and how everything in the world has polarities. I was not myself, but fully myself, more aware of me than I had ever been, but in that I was a part of a greater world, a speck of the universe, but a conscious speck, and thus wholly worth love and respect as all things are. It was purely ecstatic. I think that about covers what I can recall without going off topic. Now, another experience of Dhyana many years of hard yoga and magic later. I was performing Liber Nu. I was thoroughly aware of Nuit and Hadid at the time. With my eyes closed, I saw a black landscape, flat and going on forever in the four directions. Upon it, myself, or at least my aura, an electric blue egg. And then, about a meter or so outside of my aura was another one, another aura or electric blue egg. And in a meter each way were more of these auras, and a meter beyond those were still more. Each a center of the universe, a kingdom unto itself, and united only by the space between us. But that each of these egg-shaped blue auras were erect upon this landscape made us connected by the landscape, and thus all together. All the auras and the landscape were all part of a single whole. That was the vision, but the feeling, I guess you could call it, was that of a loss of self, or self dissolved into the greater whole, but still conscious of its own distinct being, separateness which binds. We were all one because we were all separate. The separateness was our common ground, what made us all alike and one. This awareness stuck with me ever since, but upon looking at or thinking of another person, I was always aware that we were all part of the one whole, separate and individual, yet by that individuality we were the same. It's not exactly a feeling, I guess, such as an understanding of the nature of reality. Still, it was not perfect, and there are many states beyond this, but it was an important state of being, and of much value on the path. Crowley makes a point in this chapter on Dhyana to talk about the impotence of the five senses. He writes, quote, "A man of science is so well aware that his senses constantly deceive him that he invents elaborate instruments to correct them. And he is further aware that the universe which he can directly perceive through sense is the minutest fraction of the universe which he knows indirectly." End quote. It is well known by Kabbalists that sense perception belongs on the lowest rungs of the tree of life, and the intellectual perception, the rationalization of the universe, still is below the abyss and does not come close enough to experience of the true nature of reality. Dhyana does not allow above the abyss consciousness, God consciousness you might coin it, but it comes closer than sense perception. At the very least, sense perception has been burnt up by Dhyana, and the intellectual prowess of the individual is no more than a tool for the yogi experiencing Dhyana. To sum it up, Dhyana is the annihilation of ego. It is accompanied by the goal of meditation, that is, loss of self. It is solar in essence, and is accompanied with feelings of intensity, of character, and clarity of consciousness. For using magic, that puts an intent into a Eucharist or intent through sex magic, dharana, concentration, is mandatory. But the feeling during that blast of orgasm is quite similar to Dhyana, though of course this is brought about by much different means, and actually having life-changing byproducts, such as yoga does. Before ending this topic and moving on to the next one, there is a final topic I'd like to mull over. In Thelema there is the well-known subject of attaining knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. Dhyana I do not believe will bring the individual into communication with this being, but I'd argue it makes attaining KCHGA much easier. Dhyana may very well be like the state of being one feels after the pentagram and hexagram are united, but it is not an art of uniting them in and of itself. Much prayer, ritual, and clearing of the line of communication is necessary to get in touch with the angel, and yes, many of these practices should cause Dhyana after long-term exposure. But also bear in mind that every person's experience with yoga and magic are widely different. What one person needs to get to their angel may be vastly different to the next. Their state of mind during and after KCHGA will also be vastly different. Are there similarities between Dhyana and the state of being during KCHGA? Probably. Are they different? Definitely. The one similarity I would think is universal may very well be that a yogi with Dhyana and a magician with KCHGA is that both should have a clear desire to do their will regardless of external and internal pressures. They should both share an intense conviction and liberation of self that is necessary to do one's will. But I digress and desire to end this discussion at this point. Love is the law, love under will.